Okay, if you need a break, make it fast because there's more coming. We have learned in the past year just how important a governor can be in determining whether we are free or not, how important a state legislature can be in determining whether we have good, clean elections, whether we are free or not, whether our schools are going to be indoctrinating children at a local level or not, and how important a local government can be as well. Right now, you're about to have a panel of state legislators who are making a difference, standing up for freedom and for liberty. You'll understand more about the importance of the state legislators and legislatures after this panel. I'm going to introduce to you Lisa Nelson, and then she will introduce the rest of the panel. Lisa Nelson is the Chief Executive Officer of the American Legislative Exchange Council, and that is America's largest nonprofit voluntary membership organization of state legislators dedicated to the principles of limited government, free markets, and federalism. Please welcome Lisa, and she will take the panel from here.
Thank you very much, Jenny Beth. Privileged to be here, and thank you to Bob and Liz McEwen for putting together such an amazing program. Thank you to Bill Walton as the president of CNP. We really appreciate having our legislators here. And we're so glad to be here in Naples to celebrate 40 years of the CNP, which is just amazing. Something must have been happening about 45 years ago, because ALEC celebrates its 50th anniversary in 2 years. CNP is celebrating its 40th. There must have been a whole effort to build out a conservative infrastructure back then, and we need to learn from that and continue to build. I hear all of the reports this morning talking about, we've been around for 30 years, 40 years, and it just makes me feel so good about the movement and what we're doing. Before I get started and introduce the panel, I just want to make sure that I clarify a couple things, because ALEC is constantly in the news, constantly attacked from the left, and the tip of the spear of some of the things I think we've come to this meeting on earlier occasions, talking about the corporate woke culture, talking about what's been happening to us over 10 years. So want to just make sure that I accentuate that we have both a C3 and a C4. We're up here today, this morning, in our capacity as the C3, which is an educational organization, educating legislators, creating model policy. We use the word policy, not legislation, because if we use the word legislation, it would kind of accentuate the lobbying side of things. We do have ALEC Action, which is a C4, and they, like CNP, will be talking about those efforts this afternoon. What's not up here on the screen is ACE, and I've heard a lot this morning about city and county and school boards and things like that. ACE is our little startup. It's the American City County Exchange, and we started it about 5 years ago. It's a fledgling organization, but if you're interested in joining that, and I really have heard so much about what you guys are doing to focus on school boards, that's something that we absolutely want to build out and integrate into the ALEC network. So if there's any interest on your part, make sure that you reach out to me and or the folks here to talk about that and see what we can do. To the question at hand, can the states save America? It's easy to fall victim to the notion of the 3 levels of power, the 3 checks and balances. But I urge you today, and as we have been all morning, to really take your focus off of DC for a minute and think about what's happening in the states, how we're working to, I like to call it the red policy wall, stopping the things that are happening in Washington or protecting the people in the states where Washington isn't doing that. I'm hopeful at the end of our session that you will leave thinking about how you can be more impactful at the state level and understand kind of the day jobs of the people that you see here, how important each of them is to the everyday lives of your constituents and your folks. A couple other details about ALEC, just so you know, 6 of the current 50 governors are former ALEC legislators. 13 of them are U.S. senators. And the much-discussed Joe Manchin from West Virginia was actually an ALEC legislator back when he was a little more moderate. He was on our board. So he hasn't spoken to ALEC since he became a U.S. Senator. That will not surprise you. But 13 of the U.S. Senators are former ALEC members. And then 65 members of Congress are former ALEC legislators. It won't surprise you that many of those are the ones who were standing strong after the election as we focused on election integrity, the Electoral College, and everything else. The 6 governors are John Bell Edwards, Kay Ivey, Brian Kemp, Kristi Noem, Kim Reynolds, and Mike Parsons. So if any of you are from those states, they've got a history in limited government, free market, and federalism, and hopefully are staying true to those causes now that they're in office in their executive branch. Take a look at this map. This is what you I hope that you will take home with you. There are 30 states. Then this is kind of what I call the red wall. There are 30 states with Republican trifectas, 18 states with Democrat trifectas. That's the House, the Senate, and the governorship. 7 states just this last year passed the education savings accounts bills. And we're going to get into a lot more detail on this. 13 states have been focused on and are working through the critical race theory, or what we call, Newt just coined, the teaching racism in our classrooms. And I know that some of our speakers will get to that. And in fact, in Florida, in addition to moving on that, the governor signed into law, many of you might know, an incentive to teachers, a $3,000 incentive to teachers who take a course in U.S. history, pass that course, and then have the commitment to teaching our true history in the classrooms. So that's another area where Governor DeSantis has been just an amazing leader. Kansas, Kentucky, and North Carolina have pushed back against governor's overreach. And we just saw in the Pennsylvania election this Tuesday a really wonderful outcome. The state house, the legislature, sued the governor for overreach due to the elections. And they took it to the people in this lawsuit, and the people gave the power back to the state legislators, which is absolutely fantastic. And we can talk about that as well. And a couple other things that I just wanted to point out. Truth in taxation, which is something that I know Senate President Adams will discuss in Utah, is a new, wonderful issue. I think we just passed it last night in Nebraska, which is exciting. And then, of course, finally, in response to the COVID outbreak, liability protection was a huge issue for small businesses and organizations all over the country. Of course, DC couldn't get their act together to pass anything. They never did it. And we've passed it in multiple states. Over 21 states have passed liability protection. And finally, I will say that our premier publication, Rich States, Poor States, which is a ranking of states 14 years in the making. I think you've got copies on your table in front of you. Just came out last week. And we're going to talk about it here today because economic growth and economic success really is the engine of the star story from these states. So joining me today, I have 3 current leaders at ALEC. They are all on our board. To my left, Utah Senate President Stuart Adams, who is serving as our ALEC National Chairman this year. We have a rotation every year. He's been in the legislature for 11 years, and he's been working on education system and certainly taxation and budget issues, which he will talk about specifically. To his left is Mississippi Speaker of the House, Phillip Gunn. He is leading the charge on economic policy in Mississippi and just passed this year a bill to eliminate the income tax. I know you've all heard from Steve Moore many times in this room and in other rooms about the states that have passed laws to get rid of the income tax. We need to get 2 or 3 more, and Mississippi is going to be the next one next year. So we're very excited about that. We actually think West Virginia might follow suit right after that with their governor justice wanting to do that. And then finally, Florida State Representative Danny Perez, who will be the Speaker of the House in 2024, and he can tell you a little bit about the way they set up their leadership in Florida. It's unique and interesting, so he knows the fate of his future well in advance. I wanted to just kind of start with you, Senator Adams, Senate President Adams, and ask you to kind of talk a little bit about the success of Utah. You are the #1 state in our rich states, poor states, economic outlook and achievements for 14 years in a row. Tell us a little bit about how you have done that.
Thank you. And before I start bragging about Utah, which I'm very pleased to do, I just want to thank you for all you do for America. Congratulate you on 40 years. A big deal. And, you know, when these economists predict, and rich states, poor states, this isn't a history of what's happened in the state. They actually predict the economic future of the states. And economists predict all the time, and we know some of them are accurate, some of them aren't. But you can't fake some of these numbers. And so let me talk about Utah for a second. We've been #1 in rich states, poor states, 14 years in a row. Economists Art Laffer, Steve Moore, and Jonathan Williams, we have, this last year, we're only one of 2 states that had job growth. We're going to announce today, hopefully they'll announce it in Utah as I'm here, our unemployment rate's been 2.9. We're going to announce 2.8, one of the best unemployment rates in the nation. U.S. News and World Report, they rated all the states. They came out and said Utah has the #1 economy in the nation. They confirmed what ALEC has known and what rich states, poor states has confirmed. In the census, pretty hard to fake those numbers. Utah, as a percent of population, is the fastest growing state in America. These principles work. More important than the economic principles, Utah has a very high, one of the best in the nation, upward mobility and people that want to improve themselves. We have one of the lowest poverty rates. That affects our Medicaid reimbursements. It's the principles that ALEC and the rich states, poor states have put forth, they actually work. And I think the proof is in what happens as they predict. So anyway, we're thrilled to be here and thrilled to be part of it. And I could talk more about Utah, but I'll probably give some time to these other 2 speakers and speaker-to-be. It's great to be here with them. Usually it takes a couple of House members to take care of 1 senator, so it's great to be here with the speakers-to-be. Anyway, thank you.
As you know, there is a little bit of camaraderie or rivalry between the Senate and the House, so we've got a little bit of that going on. Speaker Gunn, could you talk a little bit about your efforts in Mississippi and what you hope to achieve in the next coming year?
Yeah, thank you. And look, first of all, let me say what a pleasure it is to be here with you. I have been here for the last day and a half and been able to talk to some of you and recognize that our values, I don't want to speak to these other 2 guys, but I think the values that you hold and that you have are the same ones that the 3 of us share. So we feel very much at home here. We're very grateful to be a part of this event. Thank you. I also want to give a little brief plug about ALEC. I served as the national chair last year, and I will tell you I've been involved with ALEC for, I guess, since 2006 when I was a young legislator. And I've quickly learned that the policies that ALEC advocates line up with the way I believe and the values that I have and hold. And I think it's one of the greatest policy-making organizations in the country. So that's the reason I am actively involved there, why I agreed to serve as national chair. And I hope that as time marches on, we can see how much we are alike in what we do with what this organization does. One of the things that Lisa wants me to talk about, and the thing that she referenced, is my efforts to get rid of the income tax in Mississippi. This is something that I've had a passion for ever since I got elected in 2004 to serve as a legislator. I firmly believe, now I majored in economics in college. I'm not an expert at all. I went to law school because I wasn't any good at it, but ended up knowing that economics is incredibly important. It is the engine that drives prosperity. And so in Mississippi, you may or may not know a whole lot about Mississippi, but we are deemed to be one of the poorest states in the country. So we're constantly looking for ways to create more jobs, to create more economic prosperity, to pull the poor out of the environment in which they live and move them up toward that ladder, up that ladder of economic prosperity. Well, I had a passion years ago that the income tax would be one way to do that. We began a series of hearings and meetings talking to economists, realizing that you want to move away from taxes on income, taxes on productivity, move toward consumption taxes, user fees, that sort of thing. That's just basic economics right there. We firmly believe that if you put more money into the pockets of the people, of the taxpayers, that's going to result in economic prosperity. The more they have, the more money they have, the more they can spend, the more they can save. They're going to spend it one day, even if they save it. It puts more money in the banks for the banks to loan. And economic prosperity just snowballs. So we've got to find a way to put more money back into the pockets of the taxpayers. That's going to result in them having a better ability to take care of their families. It's going to result in them having a better ability to take care of their communities, contribute to their communities. It's going to result in economic prosperity for the state of Mississippi. You look at any state around the country right now that is experiencing great economic growth, and a lot of them don't have an income tax. Florida is an example. Texas, Tennessee, those are the ones that are closest to us. And they are surrounding states, and they are booming. So this is the passion that I have is hey, let's get rid of the income tax. So I started on this mission, like I said, 4 years ago. This past year, we came forward with what I think is a very good bill to eliminate the income tax. We're moving away from taxes on income, moving toward taxes on consumption, sales taxes, user fees, that sort of thing. We have believe, and I have nothing to base this on other than the timing of it all. There was great discussion about this bill in Mississippi, I guess for the past many months. Arizona is looking to do the same thing. So this word began to leak out that some of the states, primarily Republican states, are looking to eliminate the income tax, move toward sales taxes. I believe on nothing more than just the timing and my conspiracy theory mind that was kind of a basis for the Biden administration in the rescue money that they put out there, saying that we're going to give the states this rescue money, but they can't use it to cut taxes. They can't use it to replace revenue the loss of revenue that may result from the elimination of the income or any tax. I will tell you that we have a way to replace our income without reliance upon Biden's money. So in our minds, his rule doesn't affect us. We're still pushing forward with it. But we think it's going to result in greater economic prosperity for the state of Mississippi. We're going to be pushing forward this next session. It is the number one issue for me. I have made this speech across the state of Mississippi many times, and I tell people I don't know that there's anything greater that we will ever do in our political careers that will help the people of our state more than getting rid of the income tax, letting them keep the hard-earned dollars that they have, and resulting in greater prosperity in the state of Mississippi. So I can talk more about the details of that, but that's what we're trying to do. Thank you.
You know, it reminds me that just like in Washington, D.C., when you're trying to move legislation, it takes all kinds of support. You have to have the Senate, you have to have the House, you have to have the governorship, you have to have your stakeholders in the states. And Phil, you told a story about how a bill becomes a law to a group of, I think it was third graders that you told me. Why don't you just rattle through that very quickly? Because it's complicated, and even though this passed in the House this year, we're having to kind of wait until 2022 to lay the groundwork and build the momentum for the Senate and the governor.
Okay. I wasn't anticipating that question, but I will explain it to you. Many people get frustrated with the legislative process. They don't understand it. It's complicated. It's frustrating. This income tax bill is frustrating. We passed it in the House this year. Every Republican and 15 Democrats joined up to pass it. It was an overwhelming vote on the House. Went to the Senate, and they didn't even bring it out of the committee. So that's incredibly frustrating for me. We're working in the off season to try to make sure that happens. But Lisa, I had told this story to Lisa. I guess she wants me to relate it to you. And as those who are interested in the legislative process, you probably need to know this. You need to understand how a bill becomes a law. Many of you are old enough like me to remember the old cartoon on Saturday morning. I forget that cat's name now, Bill or whatever, how he becomes a law, the little cartoon. So I had a group of third graders that came to the Mississippi State Capitol this year, and they wanted me to, I asked the teacher, I said, what you want me to talk to them about? She said, well, you need to tell them how a bill becomes a law. I said, my gosh, are you sure? She said, yeah, they need to know it. I said, they're in the third grade. And she said, but this is the gifted class. These are the smart ones. They know how to get it. I said, okay. So I go to the board and I start drawing it out. The bill starts when the legislator comes in with an idea. They go see the attorneys. The attorneys draft up the bill and they send it to the Speaker's office. The Speaker then assigns the bill to the committee chairman. The committee chairman assigns it to the subcommittee chairman. If the subcommittee likes the bill, they pass it out to the full committee. If the full committee likes it, they pass it out to the full House floor. If the House passes the bill, then it goes to the Senate and it's given to the Lieutenant Governor's office. The Lieutenant Governor then assigns the bill to the committee chairman. The committee chairman assigns it to the subcommittee chairman. If the subcommittee likes it, they pass it out to the full committee. If the full committee likes it, it goes to the full Senate. If they pass it, it goes to the governor for signing. But if they change the bill, it comes back over to the House for concurrence or non-concurrence. If we agree, then we send it to the governor and it becomes law. But if we don't agree, we send it to conference. And in conference, the Lieutenant Governor puts up 3 senators. The Speaker puts up 3 House members. Those 6 individuals sit in a room and hammer out the differences. If they come to agreement, they produce what's called a conference report. Conference report is then returned to both chambers. If both chambers pass it, then it goes to the governor. But at any time, the governor can veto the bill. If the governor vetoes the bill, it turns to the House of Origination. If the House of Origination passes by 2/3 vote, it goes to the other chamber. And if they pass it by 2/3 vote, then it becomes law. Any questions? So this third grader sitting on the front row. And I said, yes, sir. Do you have a question? He said, yes. Do you like pizza? That boy, he could have cared less about what I had just said. I said, yes, I do, and you're qualified to be a legislator, young man. So you could see the young man's eyes just glazing over. By the time I finished, it looked like a spider web on the board. I had all these lines going everywhere. So for a lot of people, that's what passing legislation is like. And they would much rather know if I like pizza than to pass the law. That's a true story. I didn't make that up. So thank you.
I love that story. So hopefully you didn't mind my digression. Danny Perez, it is no secret that Florida is on the march. Economically, you are just busting through barriers. With the COVID response, your governor led the country with the freedom and liberty that we all kind of wanted to see. For those of you who live in Florida, you are so lucky. The rest of us were, kind of clamped down in masks and feeling very, very sheltered. Tell us a little bit about what you are doing in the Assembly and on the legislative side to continue to push this with Governor DeSantis and what you've got going to potentially take Utah out as the #1 state on rich states, poor states.
It's not going to happen.
Right. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. I'm just curious. I see a couple familiar faces, but not as many as I thought. How many Floridians do we have in the room today? All right. I'm pretty sure by the time Governor DeSantis is done, I think everyone will be raising their hands because I know you guys will be moving here slowly but surely. It's funny here in Florida. We talk about all the good conservative policies we've passed, and we're seeing that in the numbers. We're having approximately 1,000 people a day move into the state of Florida, and I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. But just to give a little bit of background, I know it's a little odd for there to be a speaker in waiting for 2024 in Florida. We have this process that I believe firmly works, where after our first term, we're termed out after 4 terms, but after our first term, we choose our speaker for our last term. And so if the good Lord continues to choose, so I'll be the speaker in 2024, and it allows us to learn over the next several years to work with organizations that pass, that help write and script important policy in this country and see how we can better Florida. And look, I can tell you, Governor DeSantis is not taking his foot off the gas anytime soon. This past session, we have passed monumental legislation that we thought was important policy for us here. And, that includes making sure that election fraud didn't take place. That made sure that COVID liability was at the forefront of our small businesses, and making sure that although there's the First Amendment right for people to have their freedom of speech, that throwing a brick through a small business's window has nothing to do with freedom of speech and is violence, and we call it just that. And so I hope we can talk a little bit more about the policies that are before us and that we continue to see here in Florida. And at the same time, this is a good precursor that we're here today, that the three of us with Lisa, because on this same stage, as we continue to see the conservative policies in the state of Florida, we're going to have President Adams give Florida the trophy for first place in a couple years. We're not there yet, but I told President Adams that we're coming for him, and we don't have income tax here in the state of Florida, but we do have a sales tax, and I think we can chip away a little bit at a time at that, so that President Adams can come down to Miami, we'll have some Cuban coffee, and he'll give me the trophy eventually.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. We're going to polish it up. We're going to keep it in Utah. So before, I've got to have a little rebuttal to that if I can. But if he's going to do that, let me tell you what Utah's done. We have an income tax, but it's a flat tax. We've dealt with pension reform. We have a 401k for our state employees versus a guaranteed retirement. We have property tax reform. Lisa mentioned truth in taxation. When property taxes go up, when property values go up, which they're happening right now all across America, the rate goes down so that the government entity, the county, receives the same amount of money. So in order to raise their property tax, they have to have a public hearing and do it the old-fashioned way and have people come in and talk about it. We have liability protections. During COVID, we actually gave liability protections to employers that they couldn't be sued by their employees that came back who may have thought they got COVID in their employment. We have great regulatory processes in Utah. We're a right-to-work state. And a couple of years ago, and I don't know why we did it, but we did it, we changed our Constitution to allow Utah to call themselves back into special session without the governor doing it. And that has had an unbelievable effect. And let me talk a little bit about it because, thank you. Last April, we were shut down like the rest of America. We were all at home wondering what our future was going to be. We wondered if we were going to end up with the same or a worse economic condition than in the 1930s, the Great Depression. We met as a legislature, called ourselves into special session, set up a legislative reform commission. That commission recommended that all businesses open May 1. Our restaurants, our gyms, our health spas, everything, our bars opened up May 1. The effect that happened, last legislative session, we had more money than we've ever had in the history of the state of Utah. We did a $100 million tax cut. We funded education to 6% increase. We spent, and we bond sometimes for infrastructure. We allocated $1.1 billion for infrastructure cash. And that is because we managed the COVID virus. We managed last year. And that is what state legislators do. So you're going to have to work hard to come get the trophy.
Did Lisa ask him a question, or did he just start talking?
He's President Adams. He can do whatever he wants.
He's the Senate president. Now you see the arrogance of senators.
Yeah, no, that's what I have to put up with, 2 House members.
Well, let me chime in a little bit here. We too in Mississippi. Well, let me give you a little history in Mississippi. The Democrats controlled Mississippi until 2012. I'm the first Republican Speaker of the House in 136 years in Mississippi. And over the last 10 years, we've worked extremely hard to change the narrative in Mississippi. And you mentioned COVID liability protection. We too passed COVID liability protection. It's one of the first things we did last year when the event hit, when the pandemic hit. And our bill has been hailed and as one of the model pieces of legislation in the country for COVID liability protection. We knew our small businesses were going to be struggling from the get-go with the shutdown of the economy, with the people staying at home. They certainly couldn't afford to be sued coming back out of the COVID. We wanted to get them back up and running as quickly as possible. So we immediately and quickly acted. Past COVID liability protection is deemed to be one of the best COVID liability protections in the country, served as a model for many other states that passed it. We also took our governor to task. We have seen this around the country where this, what we call an executive overreach. These governors think they are kings, and they use the emergency protection laws that we all have, which I think every one of us knows they are designed to help you during a hurricane, during a tornado, when you got to have food, shelter, and water for the next 3 days for people. That's the extent of what we intend, or what legislators intend, when they give governors those types of powers. They're not intended to go on for a year or two. So we passed legislation this year out of the House of Representatives to scale that back. Our governor attempted to step out and spend some of the dollars that came down. We said no, and fortunately he backed down. We never had to sue him or take any action. I just went and met with him and I said, you can't do that. Under the Constitution, you can't do that. And he backed down. These are some of the things, these stories that Stuart and I and Danny are telling, I think highlight the importance of the states. I know the title of this subject is, or this segment is, Can the States Save America? I would change that to say the states must save America. That is where the states is where the action is. And we need, the legislators are the voice of the people. The legislatures around this country is where the citizens get to elect the people who speak for them in the respective states. I was reading on the way down here Dave Barton's book. I don't know if y'all are familiar with David Barton or not. He wrote a book called, great guy, good Christian man out of Dallas, Texas. Wrote a book called Original Intent, and he goes back and he talks about the founding fathers and the documents that they had written and what the intent of the country was when it was founded, and the power was in the states. That's the reason the Continental, they had so much difficulty forming this country, because they were overly concerned about the federal government overreach. So the states must save America, and it's leaders like these two guys up here who are going to make that happen, and myself. We're out there trying to make sure that the states keep the federal government at bay and that the citizens' rights are upheld.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker Gunn. You know, that makes me think about, I want to pivot a little bit off of maybe fiscal policies and talk about government overreach and in particular, the governors and the executive branch overreach that took place. You know, we were, after the election, looking at a lot of governors taking the COVID money, spending it without the authority and the appropriations from the state legislators. There's all kinds of questions between, I think, after the election before January of, can states get back into session and reconvene? And there was a number of things, President Adams, you talked about passing that bill. Danny, do you want to talk a little bit about what Florida has done with respect? I know that Florida was on the kind of cutting edge after 2001 on election reform, but you also added some new measures in this last cycle, and I think that that's probably an issue that's near and dear to the hearts of the folks here. Would you like to address that?
Sure, of course. In Florida, we've had a couple hiccups. I mean, we also had a hiccup in Broward County where there were some ballots missing a couple years ago. And since then, we've been able to right the ship, but we haven't stopped making sure that our elections process is clear and concise. And so what we've done in Florida is we've made sure that this absentee ballot fraud initiative that is happening out there by many of these left-leaning groups, quite frankly, that there is no more room for that. And an example of that is we have said if you have an absentee ballot and you are turning in your absentee ballot to a precinct, we are going to ask for your identification card. It is literally that simple. And the craziest part to me is I wish I can say that we passed this in Florida with a unanimous vote across the aisle, and as I'm sure you can imagine, it was down party lines. And honestly, most people can say, well, at least you were able to carry that flag. You were able to be the bearer for the future of Florida. And I'm very concerned by that. I can't find a reason for anyone to not be in line with that. And so what we're saying is if you want to turn in, if you want to vote by absentee ballot, you're going to be able to do so. And this is not just for Republicans or Democrats or independents. It's for everyone. The Republicans are going to have to abide by this, and so are the Democrats, and so are the NPAs or the no party affiliation people here in Florida. I said, but all we want is for there to be accuracy. We want to make sure that that ballot was actually filled out by the person that bubbled in whatever candidate they chose for. And so we initiated that here in Florida. We'll have some identification measures to make sure when they turn in the absentee ballot. Also, we make sure that they register every 2 years. We were finding out that sometimes people were registered in Florida and then they would cross a party line or cross a county line, cross a state line, and vote again in another state. And so we're just making sure that that registration process, when you move, if you forget to do so conveniently, that we stay on top of you and make sure every 2 years you have to re-register. Up to now, it's been every 4 years. And so we just want to make sure that it is as accurate and as recent as possible. It helps us with finding out where people are in our state. And last but not least, when people say drop boxes aren't surveyed enough, and we've made sure that there has to be an individual that is actually next to the drop boxes, making sure that there's nothing fraudulent going on there. And my colleagues from across the aisle said that wasn't necessary, and they fought us on that. But we just want to make sure that everything is taken care of at the drop box position. The other side is going to say, well, what's happening is you don't want people to vote by absentee ballots. You guys need to follow New York. The craziest part, ladies and gentlemen, and this is important for you guys to remember, for those of you that live in Florida specifically, if anyone tries to hit you on this, we have more opportunities to vote by precinct, by drop boxes, by early voting days than New York by almost 2. By almost 2. So we truly give everyone the opportunity to vote. We just want to make sure that it is fair and accurate. And Governor DeSantis has done a phenomenal job of making sure that in the state of Florida that we have done just that with the elections process. I think we have, and not a shot at all at my colleagues, although it is a shot at my colleagues, I think we have the best election process in the state of Florida.
One thing we will do is we'll look at it. If we like it, we'll copy it. So just know that.
Anything else on election reform from Utah or Mississippi? You guys want to speak to that?
Well, it's certainly a hot topic in Mississippi now. I will say, just to kind of as a commentary on national elections, it appears that there are some certain states that are targeted. Mississippi is a strong Republican red state, and we're kind of ignored on the national scene. But as you can see, last year there were certain states that were targeted, critical states, battleground states for the presidency: Ohio, New York, Texas, Florida. The Democrats, you may or may not know this, put what was it, Lisa, almost $1 billion into elections. Redistricting is coming. That may or may not mean anything to any of you. As you know, we do the census every 10 years. We take those numbers, we redraw districts. Under the law, we have to make districts fair and balanced, represent the same number of people. That is coming. They knew that was coming, and therefore they tried their best to take over a lot of states on the legislative side. That map that Lisa put up there earlier showed you how many states are red, how many states are blue. The state of Texas alone, they put almost $100 million trying to flip that legislature from Republican to Democrat. They were completely unsuccessful. They didn't flip one legislative chamber last time. They spent that much money and did not flip one chamber, but the Republicans flipped, it was at 3 or 7? Three chambers. And so the policies that we are advocating, that you stand for, resonate with the overwhelming majority of the country. But on election integrity, we've got to pay particular attention to those states that are deemed to be the battleground states the Democrats use to try to flip the presidency. Those are the states that carry the most electoral votes. So if you live in one of those states, that's incredibly important, incredibly critical if you live in one of those places.
And we've had a verification process for election integrity in Utah, but I can't leave without talking about a couple of things. One is we just ended a special session yesterday, and we kind of believe in the basic principles of our founding fathers, that the legislature ought to enact policy, and the executive branch ought to carry it out. And we did emergency powers reform, but on our special session yesterday, the governor would not put on critical race theory or sanctuary state. So we took that in our own hands and yesterday passed resolutions banning critical race theory in Utah and making Utah a sanctuary state for the Second Amendment. And that's what state legislators do. And that's what our founding fathers, I think, envisioned we should do, is that the legislature, that body who is closer to the people, who understands the will of the people, should enact the policy with diverse opinions, and one person, we don't have a king, should actually carry out the policy. So anyway.
I think that's amazing. I want to take a minute and just kind of talk through, we were speaking with Newt Gingrich earlier, and we were talking about the fact that, why are we calling it critical race theory? We're buying into their language. And Newt said, well, why don't we just call it what it is? They're teaching racism. So, let's start calling it teaching racism, or come up with a better name while we're here. Maybe that's something for the action session this afternoon, is to come up with a better name. But I just want to mention that there is activity, and I know I was sitting with somebody from Oklahoma at breakfast. Oklahoma passed a bill against teaching racism, signed into law last week. And just as an anecdote, when Senator Bullard, who's an ALEC member, led that effort in Oklahoma, we got on the phone with them afterwards and said, so what's happening on the ground? Are you being, like we are all used to, all the time attacked for what you're doing, for standing up for what you believe in? And his comment was, there's protests outside of my house, there's protests outside of the Capitol. And we asked, well, what's happening kind of behind the scenes? And he said, honestly, 85% of the emails that I'm getting are from my constituents saying, thank you. And quietly whispering in his ear at the grocery, wherever he is, thank you for doing this, thank you for standing up for this, and thank you for stopping this insanity in the schools. So that's the kind of issue. We, having worked for Newt back in the Contract with America days, we would always look for issues that were 75% or above. And we actually do have the support of the American people on this. They all get the joke. They just are too afraid to kind of say it. But I do want to rattle off a couple of other states, just so you know. Iowa passed the same kind of principled against teaching racism. They're all variations of a theme, but you'll get the meaning. Iowa passed it in the House and is moving it to the Senate. South Carolina referred it. Texas they're still in session. They've got 2 more weeks. They've passed it in the House and they'll pass it in the Senate next week. Arkansas was already signed by the governor. Idaho was already signed by the governor. I already mentioned Oklahoma. Louisiana, it's been introduced in the House and the Senate. New Hampshire has passed the House and the Senate, and we know with the Governor Sununu, he will sign that. Mississippi, actually you guys moved bills, but they didn't go through. Rhode Island passed in the first committee. Missouri is in committee. West Virginia is in committee. Florida, I think I already mentioned what Governor DeSantis did, but you also passed a resolution against teaching racism in the schools too. That's
exactly right. And on top of that, and I know we're close for time here, but on top of that, we had what was called the Victims of Communism bill, and it was a package. And what it did is we made sure that at least for 1 hour that our children understood what communism and socialism truly meant. Because sometimes you can walk into a public library and you'll see some communist books in there, you'll see some socialist books in there, and our children are sometimes right in front of that, and they don't understand what that means. So we're making sure that we teach them the downfall of what democracy would look like if communism and socialism were to be in our classroom. So we took it a step further here in Florida.
I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to do one last thing before we break, and this is in anticipation of the ALEC action session this afternoon. Can we go back to the slides? I want to just see if we can get the slide put up. Ken in the back. Okay, I'm going to just go through quickly. Okay, so for everybody who has a cell phone, and I'm guessing that you do, and you're hopefully on Wi-Fi, we have a calculator that you can log on to see how your state is doing. So you've seen the competition and the rivalry between the states up here. They all compete against each other we have a button that we wear at our meetings, what's your state ranking? So I want you to text And this is in honor of Bob and Michael Olson, who are teaching me how to use technology a lot more smartly. So text 901-295-0970. Pull out your phones and text in that. In the message line, put the 2-state nomenclature for your state. So if it's Florida, if it's FL, if it's California, CA, and on and on. Once you get there, you will be immediately linked to our Rich States, Poor States calculator. And if you click on the red button that says calculate my different steps, you can see when President Adams was talking about all the things that they have done in Utah to be number one, and when Danny Perez is looking at that and saying, what do I need to do to take him out of the top slot? This calculator will give you a guide for what you want to talk to your state legislators about, the momentum that you want to give them. And I think we'll talk about this a lot more at the Action Center, but I just wanted to get that text in your phones so that we could kind of play around with it later. And then finally, I will just say that we have our annual meeting, much like this, of all legislators in the great state of Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah, this summer, July 28th through 30th. And we will have probably upwards of 1,300 or 1,400 attendees, which we're really looking forward to.
We're excited to have everyone there. And if you want to compare, and when you get onto that app, you can put Utah in and compare your state to Utah.
Just had to get that in. Thank you very much to our panel. Can we give them a round of applause?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.